the Deseret Book Audio Library presents Rumors of War, Volume 1 in the series Children of the Promise by Dean Hughes. Abridgment read by Tom Hughes. And now, Rumors of War.
Rumors of War by Dean Hughes. Chapter 1. Elder Thomas had looked out the window a dozen times in the last 2 hours. He had scanned the horizon, a craggy line of spires and boxy buildings in the hazy fall light, but he saw nothing that was alarming. The nearby Jewish ghetto was unusually quiet. Maybe all the warnings were wrong. Maybe the trouble was over. And then he spotted smoke, black and boiling. "It's starting," he said. "They've set something on fire." Elder Meekum pushed backwards from the table, his chair making a scraping noise on the hardwood floor. "Where?" he said. And then in a moment he was next to Elder Thomas, his bulk demanding its share of the space. Elder Thomas pointed at the plume of smoke. It was in the ghetto, but rather far off, probably toward the end of the street that people called Judengasse, Jewish Street. The elders lived just outside the ghetto, in a seedy part of town where apartments were cheap. "It started burning hard right from the beginning," Elder Thomas said. "Let's go see what it is." "No, we'd better not." Elder Thomas was the senior companion, the one expected to use wisdom. Out tracting that morning, he had decided, after being warned several times, that he and his companion had better get back to their apartment where they would be safe. Early in the morning, stormtroopers, the SA, and Gestapo agents had begun ripping apart Jewish homes and businesses and arresting Jews. 2 days before, in Paris, a young Jew named Herschel Grinspan had shot a German diplomat named Ernst vom Rath, and now the diplomat had died. No one in Germany knew exactly why it had happened, since information was controlled by the Nazis, but the Völkischer Beobachter, the party-sponsored newspaper, had been full of indignation, and everyone was predicting trouble for the Jews. The talk, however, was strange. People hadn't told the elders, "I'm furious, I'm going to get those Jews." They had said, "Be careful. It's not safe to be out in the streets." "What are they doing, burning people's houses?" Elder Meekum asked. Elder Thomas wasn't sure. In the ghetto, all the shops were operated by Jews, including Brother Goldfarb's tailor shop. He was a Mormon, but formerly a Jew, and he was no longer allowed to live with his wife and daughter. Hitler had passed a law against Jews being married to Christians. Still, Elder Thomas had never thought that the Nazis would start setting fires. Now he wondered what might be coming, especially for Brother Goldfarb. "Come on, let's go take a look." Elder Meekum took a couple of steps toward the door. Elder Thomas hadn't moved yet, but he heard himself saying, "Okay, but we've got to be really careful. I'm taking my camera." This was foolish, but Elder Thomas pulled his own camera from a drawer by his bed, and he strapped it over his shoulder. It was November 10th and not terribly cold, but he walked to the wardrobe and got out his wool coat. As he pulled it on, he said, "We're taking a big chance. I hope you know that." The truth was, Elder Thomas hadn't been this excited since the evacuation earlier that same fall of 1938. In September, the missionaries had received orders from President M. Douglas Wood to clear out. Germany had lined up troops on the border of Czechoslovakia, and war seemed imminent. Elder Thomas and Elder Meekum had packed up and caught a train for Holland, and then, for 3 weeks, the missionaries from the West German mission, and from all over Europe, had waited to see whether they would be shipped home. But no one had stopped Hitler. He had gotten his way in Czechoslovakia. The missionaries had returned to their missions, but tension in Europe had remained high, and sometimes Elder Thomas wondered whether he would be able to finish the 2.5 years he had been called to serve. The elders hurried down the 3 flights of stairs, taking 2 steps at a time. But as they pushed through the big outside door, Elder Thomas said, "Okay, slow down. Just walk normally." Elder Thomas had been in Frankfurt 2 months, but he had been on his mission over a year. Elder Meekum had come to Frankfurt at the same time as Elder Thomas in early September, but that had been the beginning of his mission, so his German had not come all that far. The elders walked the several blocks quickly. When they turned the corner onto the street where the fire was, both of them stopped. "The synagogue," Elder Thomas said. That beautiful old building. It had never occurred to Elder Thomas that anyone, even the Nazis, would do such a thing. The two approached, but they stayed in the background, away from the crowd. The cupola at the front corner of the building had already caved in, and flames were gushing from the roof. A big crowd had gathered, but people were only watching, and they appeared solemn. "I don't get this," Elder Meekum said. "They're all just watching. Who set the fire?" "Nazis. Party members, I would guess. These people had nothing to do with it." "Why didn't anyone try to put it out? It makes me sick." Elder Thomas felt much the same, and yet he understood better than Elder Meekum. He had been in Germany long enough to know the way Nazis operated, and the way people reacted. Fear was a factor in almost every decision. "I want a picture," Elder Meekum said. "I want proof. Stand in front of me. I'll take my camera out of its case, then I'll take a quick shot over your shoulder." "Wait a minute." Elder Thomas scanned the street, checked behind them, but no one seemed to be paying any attention to them. "Okay," he said. "Just snap one picture and then let's go. President Wood would die if he knew we were here." Elder Meekum stepped behind Elder Thomas, but he stayed close, and Elder Thomas could tell that he was fumbling to get his camera out. "Hurry, do it now." In another few seconds he felt the camera, or actually Elder Meekum's big fists, rest on his shoulder, and he held his breath until he heard the shutter release. But then he couldn't resist. "Okay, let me get a shot," he said. This was not like Elder Thomas. He had been trained by his vigilant stake president father. Elder Thomas's name, David Alexander, the same as his father's, had identified him all his life. At East High in Salt Lake City he had been Alex, but he had also been President Thomas's boy. His good looks, his dark, wavy hair and earnest brown eyes gave him the look of a movie star. But there was nothing mysterious or suggestive about the clean lines of his face. He was exactly what he seemed, upfront, reliable, even predictable. He didn't break rules. Elder Meekum stepped forward, and Elder Thomas got his own camera out. He shot around Elder Meekum, not over him, and he took slightly longer to get the picture framed. He had snapped the shot and was pulling the camera back inside his coat when he heard someone say in German, "What are you doing there?" Elder Thomas tucked the camera inside his coat, under his arm, and stepped back to Elder Meekum's side. He tried to appear natural, but his heart was suddenly beating hard. A man was crossing the narrow street and coming toward them. "Taking pictures?" the man said, as he walked closer. Elder Thomas saw what he feared, the black uniform with silver trim, the braided hat. Gestapo. "Yes, I took a picture," Elder Thomas said breathlessly. "Isn't that acceptable?" "Wo kommen Sie her? England?" "Nein, aus Amerika." "If you think it is not wrong to take pictures, why do you hide your camera?" Elder Thomas answered in German. "I was not certain." "What is your name?" the agent said. "Alex Thomas. We're missionaries. I'm sorry if I did something wrong." "Of course you have done nothing wrong. We have no laws against taking photographs. I would expect, however, that you would make photographs of our castles and rivers, not of this unfortunate fire." "Yes. Usually, that's the kind of pictures I take." "It's a terrible thing these people have done, lighting this fine building on fire." The agent was rather hefty but hard, and his eyes, veiled by heavy black eyebrows, were steady. He looked up at Elder Meekum. "Don't you agree, my big friend?" Elder Meekum nodded, but he said nothing. "And what is your name, sir?" "Meekum. Louis Meekum." My, 2 such fine young men, and here to teach the German people religion." Elder Thomas said softly, stubbornly, in German, "We were uncertain what was happening. We just came to look. It's bad, the things that can happen when people become very, very angry. Wouldn't you say so, Mr. Thomas?" He opened his coat and placed his gloved hand on his hip. He was letting the elder see a long nightstick hanging from his belt. His thick lips puckered into a nasty smile, and his eyes held firm as though daring Elder Thomas to react. Elder Thomas said nothing. "So what do you think of these German people doing this?" Elder Thomas had had enough of this. "Could we go now? We don't want any trouble." "Of course you may go, Mr. Thomas, but I thought you wanted to see this terrible fire." He motioned toward the building. "Step closer if you like." "We already saw it," Elder Meekum said in English. Elder Thomas knew he couldn't let anything get started. He took hold of Elder Meekum's arm, began to turn him. "We'll go now," he said to the agent. "Ach, only one matter first." The elder stopped. "I must have your cameras. You can stop by later and pick them up at the police station down the street. But for now, I must keep them." Elder Thomas began to pull his camera out, but Elder Meekum said, "I thought you told us there was no law against taking pictures." "You are right about that, Mr. Meekum," the agent smiled, showing his teeth for the first time, brown and blunt. "But your pictures might be helpful. We can study them and perhaps determine who started the fire. We got here too late to see who did it, but I can guess." He pulled his arm forward, trying to loosen Elder Thomas's hold. But Elder Thomas gave his own camera over, and then he took Elder Meekum's from him and handed it to the agent. "You may call at the police station tomorrow. Tell the policeman there that Agent Kellerman told you to pick up your cameras. There will be no problem." Again the elders turned to leave. "Ach, one other thing. When you write your families, tell them not to believe the lies the American press tells about Germany. We'll tell them the truth, Elder Meekum said. That's what we believe in. He was leaning forward a little, using his height and weight to communicate more than his words. Kellerman didn't back off. He said firmly, "Don't make a mistake, Mr. Meekum. I have comrades close by." "Oh, I'm sure you do. You wouldn't dare take someone on by yourself." Elder Thomas suddenly stepped forward and slid his shoulder in front of Elder Meekum. "Sir, we'll be more careful in the future." "That is right. You will be much more careful." He was looking at Elder Meekum. "I know your names. I'll soon know your address. I wouldn't make another mistake. Don't worry. We want no trouble. We're missionaries. That's our only interest in being here. You are foreigners. That's what you are, and we don't need your kind. We don't need you to teach us religion.